Alien hover tanks, encased in shimmering energy shields, rolled through the streets of major cities. Plasma cannons carved craters into landscapes, and entire battalions were wiped out before they could fire a single shot. To the Valthrons, humanity's weapons were relics, toys that posed no threat to their advanced arsenal. In the war room of Fort Vanguard, a fortified base nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, Major James Hudson watched grimly as live feeds displayed the devastation. His face, weathered by years of military service, was a mask of composure, but his sharp, steel-gray eyes betrayed his turmoil. "Another division gone," said Lieutenant Mark Tom, seated beside him. Tom, a wiry man with glasses perpetually sliding down his nose, was the brains behind many of Earth's desperate strategies. He spoke without emotion, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. "Their shields, nothing gets through." "Nothing yet," Hudson replied, his voice low but steady. His words carried a weight that silenced the room. Hudson turned to the third member of his team, Sergeant Kyle Briggs, a hulking figure with arms as thick as tree trunks and a temperament to match. Briggs sat sharpening his combat knife, his expression grim. "We've been outclassed before, sir," he rumbled. "Doesn't mean we can't fight back." Before Hudson could respond, a hologram flickered to life at the center of the room. General Rauter, the Valthran commander, loomed over them in translucent blue, his crystalline features glinting with disdain. "Humans," Rauter began, his voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance, "your resistance is amusing but futile. Your crude machines, your pitiful strategies, they are beneath our notice. Surrender now, and perhaps we shall grant your species the mercy of servitude." Hudson stood, his back ramrod straight, as he faced the projection. "We don't surrender," he said, his tone firm but devoid of theatrics. Rauter's crystalline lips curled into something resembling a smile. "Then you shall perish. The universe has no room for the weak." The hologram vanished, leaving the room bathed in silence. Hudson exhaled slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He turned to his team. "We've got less than 24 hours before they reach this base. We hold the line." Tom adjusted his glasses. "With what?" "Sir, our artillery can't even scratch their shields." Hudson's lips pressed into a thin line. "We adapt. We've faced impossible odds before. This isn't about matching their technology. It's about finding their weaknesses." Briggs chuckled darkly. "They've got weaknesses, all right. They're just too busy patting themselves on the back to notice." The team leaned in as Hudson began sketching a plan on the holographic table. The centerpiece of his strategy was an unassuming vehicle, the M1 Abrams tank. The Valthrons had dismissed it as outdated, a relic of human history, but Hudson saw its potential. "They underestimate us," Hudson said, his voice hard. "They think our tech is obsolete. Let's show them what ingenuity looks like." The M1 Abrams, he explained, had been retrofitted with tungsten-tipped rounds capable of immense kinetic force. While the Valthran shields could deflect energy-based attacks, they were vulnerable to sustained physical impact, a fact Tom had deduced from hours of studying battle footage. "We'll hit them where it hurts," Hudson continued, his finger tracing the outline of the nearby mountain pass. "This terrain gives us an advantage. Narrow paths limit their mobility, and we'll have the element of surprise. Briggs, you'll be the gunner. Tom, I need you coordinating our timing down to the millisecond." Tom nodded, his eyes lighting up with the flicker of hope. Briggs slapped the table with a meaty hand. "Let's see how their fancy shields hold up against good old-fashioned human firepower." As the team dispersed to prepare, Hudson lingered, staring at the holographic map. The weight of command settled on his shoulders, but he refused to let it bend him. This wasn't just about holding a line. It was about showing the Valthrons that humanity wouldn't be crushed so easily. In the depths of the Valthran mothership, General Rauter reviewed the latest reports from his commanders. The humans had put up a feeble resistance, but their forces were scattered and disorganized. It was almost too easy. One of his lieutenants, a younger crystalline officer named Virlog, approached cautiously. General, the humans are regrouping near the mountain range. They appear to be fortifying their position. Rauter laughed, a sharp, crystalline sound. Let them. Their desperation only makes this more entertaining. Deploy the hover tanks and plasma units. Wipe them from existence. As Virlog bowed and left, Rauter turned his gaze to a display of Earth spinning slowly in the void. The humans were tenacious, he admitted grudgingly, but tenacity without power was meaningless. He would crush their hopes as easily as he had crushed their armies. Back at Fort Vanguard, the human soldiers prepared for what could be their final stand. Hudson walked among his men, exchanging nods and words of encouragement. He paused beside the M1 Abrams, running a hand along its cold, steel exterior. "You ready for this, old girl?" he murmured. The tank, silent and steadfast, seemed to echo his resolve. The night stretched on, and as dawn approached, the tension in the camp was palpable. Hudson stood on a ridge overlooking the mountain pass, Tom and Briggs flanking him. "They're coming," Tom said, his voice tight. Hudson nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Then let's give them a reason to remember us." As the first glimmers of alien hovercraft appeared on the horizon, the stage was set. The battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. The soldiers of Fort Vanguard stood in tense silence, their faces illuminated by the pale light of flickering halogen lamps. The air was thick with a sense of finality, each breath heavy with unspoken fears. Despite the looming threat, Major James Hudson moved through the crowd with an air of steady confidence. His presence was an anchor, grounding the men and women who would soon face an enemy far beyond their understanding. Hudson reached the makeshift podium, a rusted metal crate propped up in the center of the staging ground. He cleared his throat, and the chatter ceased. "Listen up," he began, his deep voice carrying across the assembly. "You've seen what they can do. You've felt the weight of their arrogance. They think we're weak. They think we're broken." He paused, his gaze sweeping the faces of his soldiers. "But they don't understand what it means to fight for something worth protecting." A murmur of agreement rippled through the ranks. Hudson allowed it to linger for a moment before continuing. "They've got shields and plasma cannons. We've got grit, ingenuity, and the will to survive. That's why we're going to win. Not because we're stronger or faster, but because we're smarter. We're human, and that's something no alien technology can replicate." The soldiers erupted into a cheer, brief but defiant. Hudson stepped down, exchanging nods with Lieutenant Mark Tom, who stood nearby with a tablet in hand. "Nice speech," Tom said. "Now, let's make sure it's not the last one." Inside the war room, Hudson, Tom, and Sergeant Kyle Briggs gathered around a holographic map of the mountain pass. The atmosphere was tense but focused. Tom tapped a point on the map, enlarging it to show a narrow choke point flanked by steep cliffs. "This is where we make our stand," Tom said. "The terrain limits their mobility, forcing them into a bottleneck. If we position the Abrams here," he pointed to a shaded zone along the cliff edge, "we can target their hover tanks during shield cooldowns." "Assuming we can time it right," Briggs interjected, leaning over the map. "Those shields don't stay down for long." Tom adjusted his glasses, his expression serious. "I've analyzed their patterns. The shields drop for approximately 3 seconds after firing. If we synchronize our strikes, we can exploit that window." Hudson folded his arms, nodding. "Briggs, that means precision shooting. No margin for error." Briggs smirked. "When have I ever missed, sir?" Ignoring the remark, Hudson turned back to the map. "We'll use smaller units as decoys to draw their fire. While they're focused on the front, the Abrams will hit their tanks from the flank. And if they spot the Abrams," Tom asked, his tone cautious. Hudson's expression hardened. "They won't. Not until it's too late." The plan was daring, but it was their only option. With time running short, the team dispersed to make final preparations. Briggs oversaw the loading of the Abrams, inspecting every round with meticulous care. Tom coordinated with the communications team, ensuring the timing calculations were flawless. Hudson moved between the units, offering words of encouragement and ensuring every soldier understood their role. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the soldiers of Fort Vanguard gathered around the M1 Abrams. Its steel surface gleamed faintly in the dim light, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Briggs patted the tank's turret affectionately. "She's ready, sir," he said, his voice tinged with pride. Hudson placed a hand on the tank's hull, his expression unreadable. "Good. She's about to make history." High above the Earth, aboard the Valthran mothership, General Rauter reviewed the latest reconnaissance reports. The humans had fortified their position in the mountains, a futile attempt to delay the inevitable. He allowed himself a moment of amusement. "Deploy the hover tanks," Rauter ordered. "Flush them out. Their resistance ends here." The alien officer Virlog hesitated. "General, the humans have shown unexpected adaptability. Perhaps we should." "Enough!" Rauter snapped, his crystalline form glinting with annoyance. "They are primitives, nothing more. Crush them." Back at the mountain pass, the first signs of the alien advance appeared on the horizon. Hover tanks glided silently through the air, their energy shields shimmering like liquid glass. Behind them marched rows of Valthran infantry, their plasma rifles glowing with ominous light. Hudson stood on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, binoculars in hand. "They're moving faster than expected," he muttered. Tom's voice crackled through the comms. "Adjusting calculations. You'll have a smaller window to hit those shields." "Understood," Hudson replied. He turned to Briggs, who was already positioned inside the Abrams. "You ready?" "Born ready," Briggs said, gripping the tank's controls. The alien tanks entered the bottleneck, their shields absorbing the first volley of human artillery. Plasma fire rained down on the defenders, forcing them to take cover. Tom's voice came through the comms again. "Stand by. Shields dropping in 3, 2, 1. Fire." Hudson shouted. The Abrams roared to life, its main gun launching a tungsten round with earth-shaking force. The projectile struck the nearest hover tank, shattering its shield and tearing through its hull. The alien vehicle exploded in a blinding flash of light, sending debris raining down on the battlefield. A stunned silence followed, broken only by the cheers of the human soldiers. Hudson allowed himself a grim smile. "That's one. Let's keep going." The aliens, caught off guard, scrambled to adapt. Their shields began cycling erratically as they adjusted to the human counterattacks. Tom's voice remained calm despite the chaos. "Next target, marked 3 o'clock. Fire in 2, 1. The Abrams struck again, and another alien tank fell. The Valthran's arrogance had left them unprepared for a coordinated assault. For the first time, their invincibility was called into question. But the battle was far from over. Alien reinforcements began to arrive, their numbers threatening to overwhelm the human defenders. Hudson's voice cut through the comms. "Hold the line. Stick to the plan." Despite the mounting pressure, the soldiers of Fort Vanguard fought with a tenacity born of desperation and hope. The M1 Abrams, once dismissed as obsolete, became the symbol of humanity's defiance. As the first rays of dawn illuminated the battlefield, Hudson surveyed the carnage below. The alien advance had stalled, their forces struggling to regroup. He knew they hadn't won yet, but for the first time it felt possible. "Get ready," he said, his voice resolute. "They'll be back, and so will we." The rumble of the Valthran hover tanks echoed through the narrow mountain pass, their shields shimmering like molten glass in the morning light. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble with the weight of their approach, a relentless tide of alien dominance. Major James Hudson crouched behind a ridge, his sharp gaze fixed on the advancing enemy. Every detail, their formation, the timing of their plasma bursts, the faint flicker of shield cooldowns, was etched into his mind. "Hold," he murmured into his comms, the word a lifeline of restraint to his soldiers below. The human troops lay hidden amidst jagged rocks and fortified positions, the M1 Abrams tank obscured beneath a camouflage net. The mountain pass was a natural choke point, but it also left little room for error. Hudson's voice came through the comms again, low but firm. "Remember the plan. We don't fire until they're in the kill zone." Sergeant Kyle Briggs sat within the Abrams steel shell, his hands steady on the controls. The tank hummed with dormant power, its tungsten-tipped rounds loaded and primed. "They're practically gift-wrapping themselves for us," he muttered, his lips curling into a grim smile. Lieutenant Mark Tom's voice crackled over the comms. "Don't get cocky, Briggs. Timing is everything." Shields dropped for 3 seconds after their plasma bursts. "Miss that window, and we're toast. Relax, Tom. I've got this." Briggs shot back, adjusting his targeting system. Hudson silenced their banter with a single command. "Focus." The Valthran tanks moved deeper into the pass. Their sleek forms defying gravity as they hovered mere inches above the ground. Behind them marched squads of crystalline infantry, their plasma rifles glowing ominously. The alien forces exuded an air of invincibility, their shields glinting like an impenetrable curtain. "Wait!" Tom's voice was taut with anticipation. "Wait!" Hudson's hand hovered over the trigger of his radio. His heart pounded in his chest, but his expression remained stoic. Then, like the crack of thunder, he barked the order. "Now!" The M1 Abrams roared to life, its main gun unleashing a tungsten round with earth-shattering force. The projectile streaked through the air, slamming into the nearest hover tank. The Valthran shield flickered, collapsed, and the tank erupted into a blinding explosion. Shrapnel tore through the air, sending nearby infantry diving for cover. The battlefield descended into chaos. Human soldiers emerged from their positions, firing rocket launchers and rifles at the stunned Valthran forces. Plasma bursts rained down in retaliation, carving glowing craters into the rocky terrain. "Target down," Briggs growled, his voice a mix of adrenaline and satisfaction. "Next." Tom's voice came over the comms, clipped and efficient. 2 clicks left, moving fast. Shields dropping in 3, 2, 1. The Abrams fired again, and another hover tank disintegrated in a plume of fire and smoke. Hudson watched as the alien advance faltered, their confidence visibly shaken. "Keep hitting them," he ordered. "Don't let them regroup." The Valthrans, however, were far from defeated. Their infantry advanced in tight formations, their plasma rifles cutting down human soldiers with ruthless precision. Hover tanks adjusted their trajectories, their shields shimmering as they prepared to fire. "Incoming!" Tom shouted. "Plasma cannons, 12 o'clock." Briggs swung the Abrams turret, locking onto the lead tank. He pulled the trigger, and the tungsten round struck true, obliterating the target before it could fire. But the recoil rocked the tank, and a second plasma blast grazed the hull, sending sparks cascading across the interior. "We're fine," Briggs barked, gritting his teeth. "Abrams can take it." "What's next?" Hudson's voice cut through the chaos. "Focus on the tanks. Infantry is secondary. We take out their mobility, and the rest will crumble." The alien forces were adapting, their shields cycling faster and their formations tightening. Hudson could see the shift in their strategy, a calculated response to human ingenuity. He turned to Tom. "They're learning." "I noticed," Tom replied grimly. "We're running out of easy shots." Hudson's mind raced. They needed to escalate, to exploit the aliens' newfound caution. He scanned the terrain and spotted a weak point in the cliff above the pass, a precarious overhang held together by brittle stone. "Briggs, aim for the cliff edge," he ordered. "Are you sure?" "That's a one-shot deal," Briggs said, his tone skeptical. "Just do it." Hudson snapped. The Abrams turret adjusted, and Briggs fired. The tungsten round struck the overhang with pinpoint accuracy, and the cliffside collapsed in a deafening avalanche. Tons of rock cascaded onto the Valthran forces below, crushing tanks and scattering infantry. The human soldiers cheered, their morale surging at the sight of the devastation. But Hudson remained grim. He knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Tom's voice broke through the comms. "General Rauter's command hovercraft just entered the pass." He's bringing reinforcements. Hudson's jaw tightened. Then we end this now. Briggs, you're with me. Tom, coordinate the artillery to cover our flanks. The Abrams surged forward, its engine growling like a beast unleashed. Plasma fire rained down, but the tank's reinforced armor absorbed the impacts. Hudson directed Briggs toward the command hovercraft, its shield glowing like a radiant star. "This is it," Hudson muttered. "We take him out, or we lose everything." Tom's voice crackled. "Shield cooldown in 5, 4, 3. "Steady," Hudson said, his voice steady despite the chaos. 2, 1. "Now!" The Abrams fired its final tungsten round, the projectile streaking toward Rauter's hovercraft. The shield collapsed, and the round struck the craft's core. The resulting explosion lit up the pass like a second sunrise, engulfing alien troops in a fiery inferno. The remaining Valtran forces, leaderless and demoralized, began to retreat. Cheers erupted from the human lines as the realization sank in. They had held the line. Hudson stepped out of the Abrams, his boots crunching on the rocky ground. The battlefield was a smoking ruin, but it was theirs. "We did it," Briggs said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Hudson nodded, his expression solemn. This was just one battle. The war's far from over. He turned to his soldiers, raising his voice above the din, regroup and resupply. "We've proven we can fight. Now let's show them we can win." The mountain pass was eerily silent in the aftermath of the battle, save for the occasional crackle of burning wreckage and the distant echoes of retreating Valtran engines. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of plasma scorches and the acrid stench of smoldering debris. Major James Hudson stood at the edge of the battlefield, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the alien forces had vanished. The lines of his face, etched by years of command, were sharper now, shadows of exhaustion and resolve carved deep into his features. Sergeant Kyle Briggs climbed out of the M1 Abrams, his once immaculate uniform smeared with soot and sweat. He gave the tank a parting slap on its dented hull. "Hell of a fight," he muttered, wiping his brow. "I think she earned her retirement after that." Lieutenant Mark Tom approached, his tablet clutched tightly in one hand. He looked up from the screen, his face pale but triumphant. "Confirmed retreat," he said. "What's left of their forces is regrouping beyond our radar range. Casualty reports are coming in now." Hudson nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Send medics to the wounded and recovery teams for the fallen. And get a message to command. Fort Vanguard held." His voice carried no trace of celebration, only a deep, solemn respect for the price of their victory. As the sun began its slow ascent over the battlefield, its light painted the shattered cliffs and charred craters in hues of gold and crimson. The surviving soldiers of Fort Vanguard gathered near the remains of the command center, their faces a mix of relief, grief, and cautious pride. Hudson stepped onto a makeshift platform, the murmurs of the crowd dying down as he raised his hand. "You fought today not as individuals, but as one united force," Hudson began, his voice carrying over the assembly. "You faced an enemy that underestimated your resolve, your intelligence, and your humanity. And you proved them wrong." His eyes swept over the crowd, lingering on familiar faces marked by dirt and blood. "But this victory didn't come without sacrifice. Look around you, at the empty spaces where friends and comrades once stood. Honor them by remembering that every step forward, every inch we reclaim, is because of their courage." The soldiers responded with a solemn salute, their fists clenched to their chests. Hudson stepped down, the weight of his words settling over the crowd like a mantle. In the hours that followed, the camp buzzed with activity. Medics worked tirelessly to treat the wounded, their triage tents a hive of controlled chaos. Engineers and mechanics inspected the damaged vehicles, salvaging what they could from the smoldering remains. The Abrams stood at the center of it all, a silent sentinel bearing the scars of its defiance. Briggs leaned against the tank, sharing a rare moment of quiet with Tom. "Think they'll give us a medal for this?" he asked, his tone half-joking. Tom adjusted his glasses, his expression thoughtful. They'll probably send us back out there before the paint even dries. You know how this works. Yeah, Briggs said with a wry smile. But it'd be nice to hear someone say, thank you, every once in a while. Far above, the Valthuran mothership loomed like a dark star over Earth's atmosphere. In its sterile, crystalline command chamber, General Rauter paced with restrained fury. The holographic display before him replayed the battle's final moments, the destruction of his command hovercraft, the collapse of his front lines. Explain, he demanded, his voice like a blade scraping against stone. Officer Veerlog, his subordinate, stood rigidly at attention. The humans exploited our shield cycle vulnerabilities with precision. Their tactics were unorthodox but effective. Rauter's crystalline form glinted with frustration, his jagged edges shimmering ominously. Effective? They are primitives wielding obsolete weaponry. How could they possibly? Perhaps their strength lies not in their tools, Veerlog interrupted, earning a sharp glare from his superior, but in their adaptability, their ability to think beyond the limitations of logic and probability. It is unsettling. Rauter dismissed the thought with a wave of his segmented arm. They may have won this skirmish, but the tide of this war is inevitable. Begin preparations for a counterassault. This time, we leave nothing to chance. Back at Fort Vanguard, Hudson stood alone on a rocky outcrop overlooking the battlefield. The distant hum of activity from the camp was a faint reminder of the world he was fighting to protect. He held a small, battered notebook in his hands, its pages filled with hastily scribbled notes and sketches. He flipped to a blank page and began writing, his pen moving with deliberate strokes. Victory today, but at a cost that cannot be measured in numbers. Every life lost is a weight I carry, a debt I cannot repay. But if this war has taught me anything, it's that humanity's strength lies not in its weapons or its technology, but in its spirit. The Valthrans believe themselves superior, but they've yet to understand the one truth that defines us. We fight not for conquest, but for survival. For each other, and that makes us unstoppable. As he finished, Hudson looked up at the horizon. The mountains stood as silent witnesses to the battle, their jagged peaks scarred but unbroken, much like humanity itself. He tucked the notebook into his jacket and turned back toward the camp. The war was far from over, but for the first time in months, hope felt like something tangible. Briggs and Tom met him at the edge of the camp, their expressions a mix of weariness and determination. So, Briggs said, "What's next?" Hudson allowed a small smile to tug at his lips. "We rebuild, we regroup, and we get ready for whatever they throw at us next." The three men stood in silence for a moment, the enormity of the task ahead looming over them. But there was no hesitation in their eyes, only the quiet resolve of those who had faced the impossible and lived to fight another day. "Let's get to work," Hudson said. Together, they walked back toward the camp, the first rays of dawn casting their shadows long across the battered earth.